Hello. Can everyone hear me, see me, relatively comfortable out there? Cool. Thumbs up. Thanks. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Jacob Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the Architectural League. And before kicking things off, we have a full evening tonight, so I don't want to take too much time, but I want to just begin with a few words of thanks. First of all, to our gracious hosts here at Cooper Union, particularly Haley Eber and Mauricio Higuera, and then to the whole league team, who amaze me every day in all kinds of ways, but especially for this program. Anne Rieselbach, the program director, and Zoe Fruchter, our program manager, have been instrumental. This program forms part of our current work series, which is itself supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and New York State Legislature. And then importantly, beyond the current work series, absolutely none of what we do would be possible without the support of the members of the league, many of you. So thank you so much for being a part of our community. This spring, the Architectural League has been working to follow the lead of disability justice organizers as they emphasize intersectional approaches to thinking about access over notions of universality. Over the past several months, current work lecture series, we've heard from practitioners working on different typologies, including art museums, branch libraries, and supportive housing, and soon, we think, sidewalks and streets. For all of this, our hope has been to support conversations about what it takes to reach beyond the often inconsistently executed design ramifications of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as we address how the fields that are charged with planning, design, construction, and management can more fully support the creation of an inclusive, accessible built environment. As we sit here on ancestral Lenni Lenape homelands with violence raging across borders abroad and across barricades right here in the city, we know that the built environment affects our understanding of the world, our sense of agency within it, and the ways in which society does or doesn't value differing, or in this case, this is key, dissenting perspectives. The built world is a fundamental way that society expresses who belongs, where, and how. Designing for and with difference at all scales and with great sensitivity has never been more important. And there's no more important place where this sensitivity is deployed than in schools. So, one last but certainly not least note of thanks goes to Irina, Verona, and Jennifer Carpenter, who have conceptualized and guided this program over the course of the last several months with the league team. So we're so grateful to them. Irina Verona is founding editor of Praxis, a journal of writing and building. She received her MArch from Columbia and a BA from Princeton, and currently teaches at Barnard and Columbia. And then Jennifer Carpenter has lectured widely on the subject of designing for neuroinclusion. She received her MArch from Columbia and a BA from Yale, and she currently teaches a course on disability architecture and play at GSEP. Together, they're the founding principals of Verona Carpenter Architects, which describes the firm's work as, quote, designing for greater inclusion by recognizing and embracing the neurodiverse world we live in, seeking to provide a range of sensory environments where more people can feel at home. We're really grateful to them for that work and for the work that has gone into tonight. So I'll invite them to the stage to give us better orientation to how it's going to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you to the league. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to this incredible panel. We're so thrilled to be here with you. You can get more information about all these amazing people on the league's website. We will not go into detail on their awesome bios. I'm Jennifer Carpenter.
And I'm Irina Verona.
We both use she, her pronouns. We are thrilled to introduce you to this topic. And we are really excited that we have created a panel that is not all architects. You are welcome for that, because creating accessible places for learning is not just the province of architecture. And on the screen, you can see our names. And you also see a QR code. And this QR code will take you to Slido, which is a platform where you can leave comments and questions throughout the evening. If the Wi-Fi does not cooperate, don't worry, there are other ways that you can ask questions at the end. This is an outline of what we'll be talking about tonight. Irina and I will give an introduction, and then we will have a series of short presentations. We have Kayla Hamilton first, then Lauren Melissa Elsie, Mary Burnham, and Christy Patton. And then we'll have time for discussion. The images on the screen are of the Quad Preparatory School. It's a school for neurodivergent learners, and it's the first place that we engaged with and asked the question, what is an accessible school? So it's more than access. Access means I can get in the door, I can move around. And it's more than inclusion, which is I'm welcome into your world. We want to define accessible schools tonight as schools that can be meaningfully occupied and enjoyed, important, by kids and adults, including by disabled kids and adults, and where you can be yourself. Nearly 1 in 5 New York City students is diagnosed with a disability, either physical, non-physical, or both. And we want to be clear that disability is not just defined by diagnosis, but we think the statistic gives you a sense of the importance of this topic. In our society, there's a really widespread reluctance to engage with disability. And we think a large part of that is that people are afraid of the language, or they're afraid of getting the language wrong. And so we'd like to start with some language and defining some terms the way we will be using them tonight. And let's start with disabled. And the autistic scholar Nick Walker has a great definition of the social model of disability that we'll be using. In the social model, disabled is understood as the opposite of enabled. Society is set up to meet the needs of people with a specific set of traits, needs, and abilities. When a person is disabled, we mean that society isn't properly set up to enable their participation. I think I skipped one phrase that's important. Those privileged people are enabled or abled when the society is set up to meet their needs. Let's also define neurodivergence. This term was coined in 2000 by Kassiana Asasamasu, and she defines it as any significant divergence from dominant cultural forms of neurocognitive functioning. And this is a broad, inclusive term that encompasses autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, PTSD, Tourette's, and other identities. Disability overlaps with neurodivergence. Autistic people, for example, can be disabled because the world is not set up in a way that enables their participation. But not all neurodivergent people will identify as disabled. The opposite of neurodivergent is neurotypical. And I want to be clear that by neurotypical, we don't mean normal. If you're neurotypical, it means the world is set up in a way that works for you. So neurodivergent plus neurotypical equals the neurodiverse world that we live in. On the screen on the left, you see an image of ramp studies that were part of early accessibility research in the 50s. And when architecture engages with disability, it is typically in the form of these pieces that are added to a project, or in the form of clearances and dimensions, as you see in the diagrams that all of us cut and paste into our drawings all the time. And these diagrams are really important, and they were really hard fought. For example, by the disabled activists Tom Malone and Shayla Jackson, who you see on the left, who were 2 of the 60 disabled protesters who crawled up the steps of the Capitol when the ADA was stalled in Congress in 1990. But somehow the process of codifying and making these diagrams has had the effect of really erasing disability somehow from the architectural conversation. And it's made it into a problem that architecture is supposed to solve or feels like it can solve through a checklist approach. And it's also led to a belief that architecture engages with disability only around physical disability. And I think you'll see tonight that that's not the case. So one way that we get beyond the diagrams is by engaging with scholars of architecture and disability. And we have on the screen 3 books that we refer to and highly recommend: Disability, Space, and Architecture by Joss Boys, What Can a Body Do by Sarah Hendren, and The Architecture of Disability by David Gisson. And these authors and others as well are challenging the idea that disability is somehow a-theoretical and a-critical, and also importantly talking about disability as a site of joy and of creativity as well, reframing accessibility and disability. So I'm hoping that these definitions and this background helps to create the space for tonight's conversation. And we'd like to introduce our work at Verona Carpenter in relation to the topic of accessibility and disability. So across the typologies that we work in, and we're showing some of them here: workplace, libraries, wellness spaces, and schools, we want to create places for the widest range of bodies and minds. And one of the reasons we really love working on schools is that we get to do workshops with students and teachers and talk with them about disability and about inclusion and hear from them about their experience. And you're seeing on the screen 2 examples of those workshops. My experience and understanding of disability started with personal. This is my son, Booker. He is autistic and he's epileptic. And I'm speaking about him with you tonight with his permission. He's getting his diploma here in 2021. And you'll notice that he's wearing earplugs, and that's because he can't stand the sound of clapping. And he's not wearing the mortarboard that's traditional for graduation because he can't stand the way that feels on his head. So Booker is often disabled by the environments that he's in. And he's also often disabled by cultural expectations as well. Something that I've observed and known for years through personal experience is that you can transform environments to make them more enabling and less disabling. And this really, through our partnership, has become the foundation for a practice at Verona Carpenter. And Irina will tell you more about that.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our architectural approach, which came out of this personal advocacy that Jennifer talked about through our collaboration, with the collaboration of our team members and our staff. Some of them are here tonight. Through architectural projects, but also through research, teaching, and engaging, which goes beyond the office and outside the office. And that's really important for us. So we're showing you here a project called the Learning Lab. It was a competition that we won in 2019. And this is really the first time we articulated this architectural approach, namely to design for a continuum of ability and disability. And we call this a landscape for learning that was really designed to create environments that adapt to their users, not the other way around. So many of the questions that we were asking in this project came out of a research phase that was actually preceded the competition. And this is a set of visits that we did to New York City schools where we documented innovative and creative do-it-yourself solutions that teachers and also students created to make their spaces more accessible. And you see here, for instance, on the left, a fidget swing for feet installed on the underside of a desk, because movement can often help with focus. And on the right, using corridors, not just as circulation spaces, but for other kinds of movement opportunities, in this case, pushing a weighted box along this path outlined in red to get the stimulation and movement that kids need. So with these ideas, we developed a proposal that focused on providing and creating more affordances, meaning more options for different ways of occupying space. And we organize these spaces not simply by function, but also by sensory experience as a kind of an overlay to function. So what you're looking at here are two diagrams of actually the same detail from the plan, a cluster of two learning spaces, a wide hallway in between in the middle, and a lab space that's adjacent. And we use these diagrams to show the different sensory environments we're creating, looking at sound on the left in blue and at light on the right in yellow. And the idea that we were trying to get at here is that within each cluster, there is a range of sound environments on the left, for instance. So the darker blue show the louder spaces. And as you get lighter and whiter, it gets quieter. So there's quiet spaces that coexist with the loud spaces. And the same is true for lighting. So we wanted to build in choice. And we also explored a looser fit between program and space, including wider corridors where a range of activities can happen, including learning and play, and solo spaces within the classrooms, as well as extended transitions between the spaces. And you're looking here at one of the kind of a blow up of one of the images that we produced that show this continuous learning landscape about flexibility and choice, which was our hope. So after the competition, which suddenly stopped, we continued to develop this project and this approach across multiple projects. And you're looking here at the Calhoun School, which is on the Upper West Side here in New York. It's one of the original open plan schools. It was built in the mid-70s. And on the bottom right is a photo of the exterior. You might know this as the TV building. And we worked on floors 4 and 7 as part of a first phase of a renovation. And the annotated plan, which you see on the screen, is part of a sensory audit that we conducted of the entire building with school and project stakeholders. And what was really important for us is to understand the entire sensory environment, meaning not just what you can see, but also the smells, the sounds, the textures, even tastes, and balance how the body moved in space. So this plan identifies issues related to navigation, comfort, and physical and sensory accessibility. And we want to point out that in this process, the student engagement was really key. We found out many things from the students. One, that there's no place for them to go. There's no place for them to go between classes, which is quite an important part of the curriculum. And there's also not any place where they can get solo time, unless you crawl under a desk as a student does on the upper right. So the design maintained this openness that is central to the pedagogy, while we worked really hard to create a more functional sensory environment. And that meant providing a standard divider between teaching spaces, which has some storage so that the visual clutter goes away, has opportunities for biophilia. We provide opportunities for movement and also for choice with furniture, including for teachers. And also we use large-scale signage and color for wayfinding. And throughout this, of course, lots of control options for lighting, acoustics, shades, and thermal comfort. So for the common areas, which are sort of around and interspersed with the teaching spaces, a strategy of functional redundancy was key. So instead of providing one student lounge, which was requested of us, we actually created a series of multiple lounges, each with different qualities, with different affordances, all dispersed throughout the floor and taking advantage of the interstitial spaces and the circulation spaces as well, with different seating options like a rocker, for instance, and also trying to carve out some of these alone spaces the students were craving. So in this project, creating accessibility was not about stripping down the environment, but about building redundancy and also providing an abundance of options. So leaving Calhoun, we want to mention another project, the Neurodiverse City, a project that we're currently doing with the Design Trust for Public Space, with our partner WIP Collaborative, as well as with community partners such as Include NYC here in the city. And the goal of this project is to make public space in New York more neuro-inclusive, not a small task. But our project is looking specifically at playgrounds. So we want to mention this project here tonight. Project is at the beginning, is kind of in the audit phase, but we want to mention it because we want to expand the discussion of accessible schools to also include meaningful access to play. So on the left, you see an on-site playground audit with disabled students and their families. This is one of many audits that we are doing. We're collecting data, quantitative and qualitative. And on the right, a drawing that came out of a lesson and a workshop at a school that serves neurodivergent kids. And we want to highlight this drawing briefly. You see the 400-foot ladder and 200-foot slide, which are elements that we all must add to our playgrounds, according to the kids. But we really want to dwell on this drawing because it's important to capture in an accessible and inclusive playground the element of thrill and imagination, which seems to have been taken out of a lot of accessible solutions. So we want to reference another project, which on the surface seems to have nothing to do with K-12 schools, but it's about really the design approach. And on the left is an image for a performance by Jerron Herman, a disabled choreographer and artist who's here tonight and who's also our partner at a class we are teaching now at Columbia on the intersection of disability, play, and architecture. And you see our group of students on the upper right in Copenhagen, where we're designing a community for disabled artists. But we want to mention this studio to build on the discussion from earlier. So if the participation and engagement of disabled kids and teachers is essential to the design of an accessible school, we must also rethink the design process to include disabled creatives. And we think the accessibility, meaningful accessibility as we're defining it here, is actually not possible without that involvement. And it also makes the process so much more fun and so much more joyful. So we'd like to leave you with 3 questions as we hand it off to our next speaker. These are questions that are kind of at the top of our mind in our work, and we think they could be helpful also for a discussion together. What if we designed for interdependence, not just independence? And we're showing you here an image by deaf artist Christine Sam Kim from her project Captioning the City, and the caption reads, "If sign language was considered equal, we'd already be friends." What if design centers disability? And we mean this not just as a starting point or as a goal, but actually in the design process itself. And what if we think of access as an ecology that we're all part of? And we're using here the term access ecology, which was coined by Kevin Godkin, which talks about the relational and situational dynamic of accessibility. Thank you. We're going to hand it over to Kayla Hamilton.
Good evening. Good evening. And where I'm from, we say, "Hey, y'all." Is it possible to get more light on the stage for me, if possible? You can just light me up. I don't have slides, so you can just give your attention all to me. And I should have made my font a little bit bigger. All right. So my name is Kayla Hamilton. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a milk chocolate, skin, fat, black, disabled, by way of visual impairment, woman with dreadlocks. And if you're unfamiliar with what dreadlocks are, they're roped, string-like hair that's formed with twisting, matting, or braiding the hair and leaving it there for a really long time. I wear wide-framed blue glasses, some multicolored earrings, and maybe like a leaf shape or an eye shape, I call it. I'm wearing a blue shirt, a light brown cardigan, and some wide leg pants and shoes that are just a little touch too big. And did you notice this scar over my left eyebrow? Or this nail polish that is chipping off? Can you tell? I'm from a small town in East Texas and born and raised on a farm. Yes. Or that talking to a room full of architects in New York City was little Kayla's beyond my wildest dreams. What about this outfit that I took on and off at least 3 times to judge its appropriateness for this event? And I say all that because I want to be closer to you. I taught middle school, special education, self-contained in East Harlem and in the South Bronx for 12 years. Self-contained is considered in the Department of Education the most restrictive environment in a community school. So that is myself, the teacher, a paraprofessional, and 12 students with varying disabilities. In addition to being an educator, I'm a professional dancer and choreographer that creates performances that center the disabled experience in its inception to live performance. What does that mean? It means that I consult with arts organizations and venues about accessible seatings in their theaters, creating quiet and STEM spaces in the theater, making sure programs are disseminated in various formats. Is there ASL interpretation? Is there audio description offered? And. So although, while I'm not an architect yet, creating and making space for my intersectional existence and other like-body minds is what I do. We are always in relation. And when I say that, I mean curiosity. I think it's important to remain curious, not only about human beings, about any and everything. And disability is relational to structures, environments in our society. It is never only in the body. Disability is never only in the body. And even within certain embodiments, people treat us differently, depending on which part of ourselves that we are experiencing. For example, the difference in the ways that I'm treated when I use my cane versus when I'm not using my cane. The difference between when my dreadlocks are nice and tight and neat versus when they're like little fuzzy and it feels a little messy. Or the way I speak up for myself, or when I'm silenced because of the imbalanced power dynamic. There is no universal experience because we never just are one thing. We are taught, or at least I was taught, that seeing is truth. I know you all understand this through your experience in design. We use our eyes to make determinations and assumptions about people, about space, on what they look like. Sometimes it's all good, and it serves us. And I would argue that most of the time, these assumptions are wrong. We should always be in relation. So which brings up the question, what would our relationship to our own bodies be if the implications of certain differences was not punished or led to denied access or care? So my experience as a visually impaired educator in the East Harlem and in the Bronx. Fluorescent lights? No. Stairs? Not so much. The lack of quiet space for me to tuck away and regroup. So I had students with me at lunch, on my prep periods, hanging out. Even students I didn't even teach. Told to decorate my classroom over and over and over again in student work. Don't let kids see you using your cane, they say. Finding alternative spaces, which ended up being the hallway or the stairwell for small groups. encouraging to make a peace corner in the corner of an already overly crowded classroom, purchasing fidgets and stress balls and flexible seating options on my own dime to make space in place where students actually wanted to be, let alone learn. Doing intervisitations to schools in the Upper and Lower East Side where students sat on the floor, they ate in their classrooms, they moved around their school building on their own, where I was encouraged and forced to keep kids in their seats, quiet and compliant. What makes space accessible? It's not only its physical, but relational structure. A type of curiosity and humbleness that asks a person what they need and not assumes to know for them. We should always be in relation. A type of attunement and transparency that can communicate all that will and all that will not be present in a space so people can form an honest relationship to themselves and each other in it. Some considerations. Can different body minds actually get into the space in a similar fashion? Heating and cooling. Is it adaptable in various rooms in the space? Is there someone to support in that adjustment? Desk, individual, group, conference style, seating. Are they all facing the same direction? Can they be moved? Are there different sensory inputs? Restrooms. Are they accessible to as many body minds as possible? Quiet spaces, sensory, flooring. Does it move from concrete to a carpet? Are there steps? Where are the landmarks? Emergency protocols. Can everyone, as many people as possible, be able to exit in a timely fashion? Wayfinding. Is there signage? Where is the signage? Is the signage tactile? And how do we design for the next global pandemic? We are always in relation. What does it mean to not center a single type of disability or disabled person? What are your intersections as an architect? How do your intersections meet those of disabled body mind? Are you in community with people who move through the world differently than you? Are you asking questions? Are you listening or just doing? We are always in relation. I invite us all, myself included, to be in a practice of attunement to recognize everyone's wholeness and interdependence. Thank you all, and I welcome Lauren Melissa.
Hi, so I'm Lauren Melissa Elthy, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today to talk about autism inclusive environments from an autistic perspective, which means that I'm autistic, if you didn't catch that there. And I also like to follow rules, so I'm going to be leaning. All right, so I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about this topic from my perspective, not because I can speak for all autistic individuals, but because I think it's important to talk about autism inclusion from the autistic perspective, because there are a lot of voices in this conversation. There's a lot of conflicting information. So I hope to broaden your perspective and your thinking around this topic. Once again, naming that I cannot speak for all autistic people. But I can say that up to 90% of autistic individuals have sensory processing differences. And that includes me. sensory processing differences are vast, and it can mean an array of things. But if we're designing spaces and environments, we are thinking about the senses and how we are going to interact with our environment through our senses, meaning sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. And also, I'd like to add 3 more senses to the conversation, being proprioception, or our sense of bodiness, our sense of movement. When we think about push and pull, we're thinking about proprioception. And in this picture, we see someone being able to use hand-eye coordination to bounce a ball, as well as 2 folks who are in a specific amount of proximity between one another. And proprioception has a lot to do with that. We also have our vestibular sense, or our sense of balance. And I wonder if you might already know where this sense is housed in the body. A lot of people would think it's the core, but it's in the inner ear. And so that's why if you see someone doing, which I'm shaking my head back and forth, they actually might be tapping into their vestibular sense or their sense of balance. It's also why we learn very well when we're moving, because we are listening and moving at the same time, and that balance and that sound is connected. We also have interoception, the internal sense, which is how we know, if our heart rate is raising, maybe we're anxious, maybe we have to go to the bathroom, maybe we're hungry, maybe we're thirsty. The interoceptive sense teaches us about that. And our spaces are also influencing all of these senses as well. But for those of us with sensory processing differences, we might be experiencing our senses differently from those who do not have sensory processing differences. And I'm certainly not going to assume that I'm the only autistic person in this room or the only person with sensory processing differences in this room, but I am going to take a try at explaining hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity in general terms. So hypersensitivity is when someone is sensitive to sensory input. This used to be called, and is sometimes still called, oversensitivity, but over and undersensitivity is subjective. So hypersensitivity might manifest in a person showing they don't want to do something that involves the senses or sensory avoidance. And it can require environmental support in mitigating sensory overload. Hyposensitivity, on the other end, is when a person is not as responsive as maybe someone else would be to sensory input. And that might manifest in sensory seeking needs or craving certain sensory input, getting more of it because it might not be felt as strongly. And it may require environmental support in providing sensory engagement. I tend to be pretty hypersensitive though, and I'll tell you that doesn't mean I'm running away from everything, because being hypersensitive to things can also feel really cool. So I often am sensory craving things like loud music, and you might not be able to tell by my dress and the bow in my hair, but I'm an avid heavy metal fan. So hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity, though, it's rare that a person will be just all one or just all the other. And often we have unique sensory profiles that includes them both. And my sensitivities might change depending on my environment. So I might not seem very sensitive to anything at all if I'm in a supportive environment. And this has to do with autism being a dynamic disability. So with that in mind, let's go back to schools. We've got 2 images of a traditional classroom, and I feel a little bad for these stock photo people because I'm using them as it's a traditional classroom. I'm sure they're great people, children. But in these pictures, what do we see? Lots of stuff on the board, bright colors, I am already hearing that high five echoing in my ears, and it looks like the students are in loud, active discussion. I'm not saying all these things are bad, but the way a traditional classroom functions might be with only neurotypical learners in mind. So here are a few examples of what I mean. We see fluorescent lighting, which, thank goodness, was already harped against today. Fluorescent lighting is painful for so many, the way it looks, but also the way it sounds. If you haven't noticed yet, it emits a buzz. And if you haven't noticed, I invite you to take a meditative stance in the next fluorescently lit room you're in and see if you can hear it. It's not very hard for me to pick up, though. We also see a row of red lockers, bright, and I bet they're going to make a loud bang. And even just this classroom, whose decision was it to have red chairs and a red board? And I bet you this room is lit by fluorescence. It's almost as though we believe that the only way students will stay awake in school is if we bombard them with sensory input. I, for one, don't think that's true, and many teachers are doing great work. So what if we put that at the forefront and not an environment that can become painful and uncomfortable for so many? Personally, when I was in school, on the surface, my educators saw me getting my work done, they saw me paying attention, and they saw me active, maybe at times hyperactive, and a little combative during class discussion. But beneath the surface, I was actually not present very often in school because it took me days to recover from migraines that I experienced due to the sensory overload of the building, as well as the anxiety that I experienced due to the constant bombardment of sensory input. Most people don't realize that anxiety can be caused by sensory overload, but it really, truly can and does, and there's a high correlation. So is this cool? White walls, empty boards. Oh, there's still fluorescents. I should have cropped those out. And my answer is no, because in the words of Loris Malaguzzi, the founder of the Reggio Emilia philosophy, the space has to be a sort of aquarium, which reflects the ideas, ethics, attitudes, and cultures of the people who live within it. So what do we know about autistic individuals? Yes, we may experience sensory overload, but we also experience sensory joy. So we want to incorporate the joy as well into our spaces, having spaces where that can be high sensory environments, having spaces that embrace happy stimming or self-stimulatory behavior, and having spaces where we can recuperate that don't look like cookie cutter catalog cozy corners. That was not intentional alliteration, but can be natural, authentic, and inviting. We would want to consider cool colors, save brighter hues for items that can be opted out of. Nature, as many autistic individuals find solace as nature can be the safest sensory space. Home-like lighting. If we don't want the lighting in our home, why do we want it in a school where we spend about half of our lives? And sound. Low sensory as the baseline and high sensory as the option. The school environment is the third teacher. It's the third educator working alongside the teachers. The environment itself must be flexible, as our teachers are. It must not be passive, but active. And it must remain responsive to the needs of the children in the space, which means nothing about us without us. A vision is beautiful, but a space is meant to be an aquarium of the experiences of those within it. So please take your vision and bring it to those that you hope to serve and be open to what they have to say, because it's really their voices that matters. Thank you. Now I would like to pass it along to Mary Burnham.
Lauren, Melissa.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Burnham. I'm founding partner at MBB Architects here in the city. And can you hear me now? Okay, good. Anyway, I want to thank the League for this wonderful program that has celebrated accessibility over a wide range of building types. And I'm really delighted to be here to talk about schools. MBB is a collaborative women-owned practice here in the city, and we're really inspired by the power of design to make a big difference in people's lives. We work across a wide range of sectors, from cultural and civic institutions, homes, workplaces, and of course schools. And educational design has always been a core of our practice. And over the years, we've increasingly been focused on how design can serve a more diverse set of learners. And we've been focusing on trying to partner with educators to support more inclusive and accessible schools. We've taken a holistic approach to designing for inclusion, to think about physical accessibility as just the beginning, really physical accessibility, neurodiversity, cultural awareness are all part of the way we approach our design practice. When we began the design for this Montessori school in Brooklyn Heights Montessori School, we built on the inclusive approach that is inherent in the Montessori pedagogy. Choice and difference are built into the curriculum, and we built them into the learning environment. These lower school classrooms have a variety of spaces, wet zones, furniture that's all movable. You have to think of the ground plane as a learning environment, purpose-built storage for the students that makes their tools accessible to them, and always a focus on the lighting, the daylighting, the acoustic of the mechanicals, and keeping the space quiet, and providing just a range of experiences within a classroom. The Montessori design principles are really based on all the many differences that each student perceives on a very individual basis. Celebrating the differences in scale, even amongst the students in a classroom, is something that is ever present. The freedom of movement for students that gives them agency to choose where they want to be and how they want to inhabit their space. We developed classrooms for this school that we call sort of an articulated classroom that has different zones where the teacher really acts as an enabler and a facilitator, and the very child-centric education will allow these students to move around and to choose their own environments. And we designed these clusters of classrooms around these sort of interior courtyard spaces that allow students additional space to move and to do their own projects and to collaborate and to gather, and all the things that are part of the daily life of a student. Finding sort of strategies to carve out spaces for the individual inside a classroom by by even just making space within the width of a storage wall can really make a difference in the life of a student. I'm going to just briefly talk a little bit about something that was mentioned earlier, just about the importance of nature in a learning environment. This is a different school not far from here at PS 41, where we were able to retrofit a green roof on top of the middle school. There was an article written recently about how important this space became to them during COVID because of particularly the neurodiverse students found such relief there. And it really, there's science around how nature reduces stress. And we sort of designed this as a science classroom. So in many ways, it is actually sort of a learning landscape, but it also is very much about a landscape of choice. This is another project in New York that we did with A+I for the alt school. And we really thought of this also as a landscape of choice where these very diverse interior environments have a fluid relationship with each other. And we were looking for ways to make spaces adaptable and flexible. If you have a curtain in a space, you can make the acoustics softer or brighter, and you can make it more private or less private. And you can make it more heavy, lit or less lit. So things like that. And then again, embedding in the classrooms these moments for the individual that are so important. And last, I'm going to just talk about a project that we designed up in Providence, Rhode Island, where it is truly about centering disability in the sense that the school was sort of an expansion and a renovation project to integrate special education students with general education students. And the purpose of our work was to really enable this integration. So this school is for students with a very wide range of physical and cognitive disabilities, and also for able-bodied children. One of the things that there are many considerations in the development of this site, but certainly bringing the landscape around the building was a very key element, moving the parking to the edges where it wasn't really part of the experience of the school, and then creating covered walkways so that children that had mobility assist devices could circumnavigate the campus along with everybody else. The landscape that we worked with RKLA on included outdoor classrooms and then fully accessible play yards where, for example, you can see the swing set that can have a wheelchair accessible swing set. Again, interior spaces are all about good lighting, good acoustics, warm materials, flexible seating, warm seating, and a very a focus on lack of clutter and visual distraction. Finally, we were thinking about how to create an environment that really was truly inclusive in the way that people circumnavigated the building. And we were able to, I think our goal was to sort of take away the binary choice of the stairs for the able-bodied and the elevator for the disabled, physically disabled. And so we worked on creating a circulation space that could, where everybody circulates the building together and everybody takes ramps to navigate the differences within the building. So this became sort of
a sort of communal approach, a truly inclusive approach that also it was sort of a celebration in a way, in the way that the architecture created these grants and gathering spaces. So in any case, I'm going to leave it at that and hand it over to Christy.
Good evening. I've had an epiphany tonight. My visual description is typically I'm a middle-aged white woman. And I've realized that's not true anymore, because if I did the math, I'd live to like 118. So I'm a slightly older than middle-aged white woman, tired, black top, polka-dotted pants, hair with a little kind of twirl to be a little fancy to make myself not look as tired, and very tiny earrings and black boots. So happy to be here tonight, and thanks for that epiphany. Okay. I want to talk about two things, and then we can do Q&A. I want to talk about how that we can do a lot of what we're talking about with design at a scale that I think can be really, really significant. I am a professor at NYU. Maybe that's why I'm tired. And I'm also principal investigator of the Nest Support Project, which is a collaboration between NYU and very, very, very talented consultants, Lauren, Melissa, one of them, with the New York City Department of Education. And we've had the Nest started in, raise your hand if you've heard of the Nest. Is that a couple of you front row? Very good. Started in 2003 in PS 32 in Brooklyn, with a mission that, if you read on the screen, we really, and this is why I think you can do like design. You can't do design like we're talking about tonight at a scale if a school district wants to have everyone in the same box, does not value the environment, values instruction more than looking at the built environment. You can't do it at scale. You can do it at scale if a school district or a program is committed to the idea that environment is really important. Lauren, Melissa said the third teacher, right? So it has to be a significant piece of the programmatic features. And if it is, then you can do it at scale. I'm going to give the third diss of fluorescent lighting. When I was doing some research, we interviewed 80 people 80 autistic individuals in Pennsylvania, some that were speaking, some that were non-speaking, that typed independently to communicate. And they said two things. They said two things to us. If I were drawing all the lines to say what were the commonalities, it was get rid of the fluorescent lights. Actually, three things. Get rid of the fluorescent lights, I can look at you or listen, you choose. And we have so much of our educational system around demanding eye contact. I can look at you or listen, you choose. If I'm not looking at you, maybe my comprehension is better. So, how are we setting that up? And then also for the non-speaking individuals, because we have this assumption in environments that have non-speaking individuals that if you're non-speaking, you have nothing to say. And a lot of the non-speaking individuals who typed independently to communicate, their message was, have stopped talking about me as if I'm not here. Do not talk about me in front of me. And if you think about behavior in environments, and you think about non-speaking individuals in environments, and if I'm in a waiting room in a doctor's and I'm non-speaking and my parent is talking about how I'm wetting the bed, but I can completely understand everything you say. And then we wonder why that there's an explosion of behavior at that time. And that individual won't wait for mom to finish with the doctor when maybe I can completely understand everything you can as that 12-year-old that wets the bed, for example. So when you take that knowledge and you take that knowledge about, yes, the fluorescent lights is about environment, but those other two things I want you to remember because that's about attitude and our bias and how we think about people. But we can do it on scale. This is the Nest Support program. This is the Nest Schools and the DOE. We are massive. And by massive, we're the largest inclusion program in the country. And I think we're one of the best. I am totally biased. When I talk about bias, it's a different bias because we do a couple things and we do a couple things right. We hire autistic consultants as full-time employees. We have autistic guest lecturers that really guide our practices as professionals, because we have a problem as professionals that I'll get into as my second point. And so this is for this year, and I think it's going up by probably 25 classrooms for next year. And one of the things we do is environment is important in how we design. So we can do this on scale, whether it's our elementary schools, our middle schools, our high schools. We're in everywhere. We're in elementary school, middle school, and high school. I started the NYU Connections program in collaboration with some of my colleagues at NYU. And we have a wonderful sensory space in the library. We're getting 2 more sensory spaces in our library. Oddly enough, no students could find quiet places in the library. Okay, so you can do it at scale. We can do it at large universities. I know this is K through 12. We can do it at scale. But the attitudes have to be right. The attitudes have to be with the idea that this is important. And, there's a saying, culture eats strategy for lunch. So, your corporate culture will eat any of your strategy. Our professional bias and attitudes will trump anything we try to do, whether it's design, whether it's pedagogy. So I'm going to share with you a couple of what are our significant professional biases as educators, as therapists, as practitioners. But my challenge to you as architects, and I think most of you are architects in this room, called architecturally good. I told you I'm tired. Most of you are architects. I want you to think about your own profession and what biases does your own profession have about accessible design. I have no idea what those are, but I know you all have them. Okay? Because it's very hard to be trained in a profession without bias against disability because we are a very ableistic society. We have a preference for non-disabled ways of being, which is ableism. Okay. And so I really want you to think about how does that play out in your profession. I'm going to show you very quickly how it plays out in my world. And then hopefully you can begin to have those thoughts yourself. Grant is someone that it types independently to communicate and what he talks about is this idea of independence. Someone said interdependence, designing for interdependence. That's Grant. Like the idea that we hold is, you have to be independent. How does that impact our work with kids with disabilities is a real problem. And, Grant basically says that is a huge systemic bias that we professionals have that really make a difference in how then we encounter that disabled body, that disabled mind. Okay. LM Lauren Melissa asked, I did this for a lecture for my profession where I basically called out my profession's professional bias a couple years ago, 2 years ago. But this is a bias we have in my profession, so think about what's the bias you have. And this is, I think, when I gave this lecture, this was for, I don't know if I ever told you this, this was one of the biggest takeaways a lot of people had. This idea that, if I behave more like neurotypical peers, I'm rewarded. And I've learned that I'm praised for not being autistic. I learned that people like me when I'm not me. Every professional in special education has done this. And it has dramatic impact on the individuals we serve. Even when you think you get it, we've trained a lot of people to say, have interest-based, do interest, make sure people have access to their interests that are autistic and make sure they have a lot of engagement with their interests. And they say, I got that. I know I do that. And then we do like a survey like this. And you can see that I'll do the shorthand of this. The only time they predominantly use interest is to address challenging behavior, which is the worst thing to do with them. Hey, if you behave, you get this Thomas the Train. We want to use Thomas the Train for everything, for every type of learning, for personal development, for relationships. And you can see that teachers and professionals don't do that. They use them to control the individual for behavior, but they don't do them for personal joy or for fulfillment. So that's a bias that my profession has. What biases do your profession have? This is a big one. We say we're strength-based, and then we write up reports like this. Okay. It's true. And then we talk about high and low functioning children. When what we all should be talking about, including, I hope this resonates with you, is high and low functioning environments. Period. Full stop. I never want to hear the word high or low functioning person again or individual. We should talk about high and low functioning environments and how do we impact those high and low functioning environments. You know, a lot of this requires us. I did a TEDx talk once that was called "I Was Wrong." A lot of this requires to say we've gotten a lot of this wrong. My profession has gotten a lot of this wrong. Special education has gotten a lot of this wrong. You know, the fact that we have a K through 12 system that says the most important thing, special education and kids with disabilities, is to build your life on your remediated weaknesses. That's the most important thing. That's what we're going to spend most of the time in the environment doing. We've gotten a lot wrong. So in closing, I would encourage you to be humble, to really reconsider kind of how you've thought about things in the past around access and disability, question your present decisions, and really be curious. Someone said curiosity earlier. Curious to imagine kind of what the future can hold. And with that, I am moving to discussion and questions. So thank you. And I'm telling everyone to come up on the stage.
Thank you so much. It's so amazing to hear everyone's stories. I hope you all have enjoyed this so far. We do have some questions in the Slido, which is super exciting. It's really fun to see those come in, so we'll get to those as well. But we've had some questions come up amongst ourselves as we've been preparing for this panel. And I thought, Christy, if we could actually start with you with a little bit more about how we can disrupt the ableism mindset. So I know you don't know architects maybe the same way some of the architects know architects, but I bet you have some ideas about this.
Go home and ask yourself that question that I asked you first. What's your bias? Because that first, I really like the idea of unlearning, learning, and leading. So like, what do you have to unlearn that you've learned? I would guess the minimum standards of ADA is what you should be shooting for. Should be something you should unlearn. If you're talking access, if you're just going for the minimum standards. I also think that if you are doing any project related to access, and I always say, you know you're in an ableist environment if no one with a disability is around the table. So ask yourself that question. My colleague Dolly Chugg at NYU has this kind of 10% rule. And it's be 10% mortified if you haven't thought about this first. That's our first. Be 10, which is fine. That's a starting point. And 10% is easy because it's only 10%. Be 10% terrified, more terrified to like sit at a table like this with a bunch of architects. And if no one with a disability is at the table, be the person that says, we're going to get this wrong. We got to question this. Just by doing that, you will start disrupting it.
Thank you.
Yes. I just want to add to that, like around the ADA being minimum standards, accessibility being following minimum standards. There's also this idea of like reasonable accommodations. And I think that reasonableness is the number one destroyer of innovation. So invite yourself to think way beyond the minimum and way beyond what people tell you is reasonable.
It's true. It sets the bar so low with like whose idea of reasonable, like reasonable to someone without much energy or desire. Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, so let's keep going with our questions. Mary, we'll go to you next. So how do the space constraints of New York City, and we know there are many, affect strategies for accessible school design?
I think that working in this urban environment that I'm sure many of you do. Certainly, you have to appreciate the pressures of, just how every square foot is so important. And when you're designing a school, certainly in the public school system, you are delivered a program that someone in an office building has created. And you're supposed to deliver, the architect is supposed to deliver that program within about 4% of the square footage for each space. So it really takes a lot of creativity and sort of subversiveness to try to figure out how you can create spaces that allow for this difference and allow for these varieties of spaces within those constraints. And I think you have to, I liked your idea of saying, try to have a looser relationship to the program and the space, in the sense that when you have, it's particularly difficult with the public projects, but think of ways to design classrooms that have that extra sort of moment just because it has to. And then think about circulation spaces as learning spaces, because they really are. Kids are moving through the building. This is when they notice things. This is when they think about things. And I think that you can do a lot with creative sort of expansion of how you think about circulation spaces in general. So any of those are sort of some strategies, but it's, I think in an urban environment, it's particularly, you're not going to have a big room with a huge nice ramp in there. So anyway.
Mary, I have a question. So if you aren't within the 4% that you're trying to be within, like what happens?
Well, there's a lot of sort of compliance gateways that you have to get through. And so it won't, in most cases, you can't get through that gate without having it. And so you have to, in one case, the school was for a quite large student population, and it really had a very small lobby, and we just couldn't figure this out. And so we made this really, really, really wide hallway from the lobby to the dining room, and it became this awesome space because all the parents could hang out there, and we put in all this seating, and it was, not in the program, but it had to be there because, we needed the egress for a really wide corridor. So anyway, things like that.
It's interesting. Kayla, the question I want to put to you, and others will have ideas about this, I'm sure. We're often told that universal design is the solution to access, that if we just design universally, we're all set. And I know you have thoughts on this because you've reacted violently to this question in the past.
This is Kayla speaking. The tension is in the word universal, because I believe there's no universal experience. And when we do name something universal, whose universe is it? Because there still is a universe there that is centered in, maybe I'll call mainstreams, like the people who are at the center of our society, or the people who are put first and center when thinking about universal design, which does not include the voices of the people who are most impacted, to which I feel like we all spoke to today. So the word universal is, for me, problematic. No such thing. In thought.
Yes, please.
And if it was kind of the magic solution, then the word retrofit wouldn't exist.
This is Kayla. I want to circle back. I realize I said the word mainstream, but the word mainstream, I'm thinking about the people who are usually put in the center of American society, or the people, in thought. Just to clarify, language in thought.
Thank you, Kayla. Oh, we have a question from the audience on paper. While Irina's digesting that, I'm actually going to ask, LM a question, if I may, about access conflict. So this is something that we get asked a lot. Well, I am trying to make a space more accessible for this person or this group of people, and I'm afraid I'm making it less accessible for someone else when I do that. Could you say a little about that?
Sure, this is Lauren Melissa, and I also want to name that I didn't do a visual description, and I want to model that it's never too late. So I am a Black multiracial woman with curly hair and brown eyes, and I'm wearing a black dress and a white bow in my hair. And access conflicts, the first thing I want to say about that is that most of the time when I hear people talking about conflicting access, they're usually more concerned for people who do not have disabilities. And they'll say like, oh, I'm worried that if I do this and I make it darker for the autistic students in this classroom, what about the non-autistic students who don't need that? What about if I change the way that I teach this method? What if it ends up harming the non-autistic students and they won't have access to this quality of an education? And I think that immediately reveals people's bias and the fact that this question around conflicting access in general, not all the time, but much of the time, is looking for an excuse to not do anything. So I would say, like, when someone brings it up to me, I first have to do like a check, like a temperature check. Are you asking authentically? Or are you saying, I don't have to do this? Because see, if I help this kid, I can't help that kid. From there, actually to authentically answer the question, I'm believing that it is an authentic question. I would say that you brought up that you and Jennifer and Irina, not Jennifer and Irina.
Sometimes we introduce each other wrong. I'm Irina, so it's okay.
You two brought up this topic of redundancy, and I really want to echo that sentiment, although it is the first time that I heard the word from you both, which is that if we're creating one version of things, then we're going to run into conflicting access needs. So maybe we need two versions. We need two break areas, one that's high sensory, one that's low sensory, maybe even three. I mean, but I might be getting a little too excited here. But looking at this idea that we have one of everything as though there's some form of scarcity, breaking that down and building in more imagination, more innovation, and more redundancy.
That's great.
Yeah, one second. And then we have a question about redundancy.
Okay.
This is Kayla speaking. To add on, the idea of an access conflict gives us reasons to come together and become closer to each other. An example that happened today, when I got up, I needed more light. I asked for it. Light came. I felt cared for, right? That was a moment, oh, in this space, someone will listen to what I need. So it provides moments of being together. How do we both simultaneously exist and get what we need? And knowing that if we ask, we may not get. But I know that you give someone an opportunity to show up for you and vice versa. So I don't look at them as like conflicts, but a way of relating in thought.
Just one thing to add to that. I love that point so much, Kayla. And I think if we make spaces that offer controls so that you can make adjustments. So when you say, I need to be brighter, I need to be cooler, I need to be warmer, whatever, we can build in, beyond code required controls so that people can come together and resolve these conflicts and the space can react to those conflicts.
And this is Lauren Melissa, and I want to add to that as well that if we can also build in this flexibility that people are able to access autonomously and not have to ask for it, especially in a school environment. Well, I think all environments, but with school environments in mind, requiring that children, and I'm talking K through 12 children, ask authorities authority figures in many buildings, if they can have something that they need and they can be told no because maybe it's an inconvenient time, is inexcusable. And so I think making sure that we build in autonomy into the environment is really key.
Okay, I'm going to read the question about redundancy. So when you design with redundancy to allow choices, how do you safeguard against growth overcrowding, where all spaces might be occupied, making choices not possible? Has that occurred in your projects? I answer the question. I'm not sure the solution, we have kind of a one-line solution or answer to this, but I think there's two things that come to mind. One is that, again, it's not just the space that is the protagonist here. And we always say that it's container, curriculum, and culture of a school. So it has to be this idea of what you do with the spaces in a school have to be part of the ecosystem of governance and education of the school. And time is also something that we have to keep in mind. And enrollment goes up, enrollment goes down. It's something that we have to kind of be, together, or mostly on the administration side of the school typically, but it's something that has to be taken into account. And spaces need to be safeguarded if that is a priority. So it needs to be sort of protected, I think.
I would just add one more angle to it in that I think we're all in agreement that there is no one answer, that you can't have one space that functions in one way. But the answer is also not to divide it up into inflexible 4 different or 5 different or even 7 different answers that solve for sort of 7 different ways of thinking about something, but they're all sort of stuck in their place. So I think every single school that we've worked with, has a tough time, has a constraints, space constraints. And I think as much as possible, we try to make these spaces adapt so that they can be changed. And so you don't have a static reality. You have a dynamic space that can be changed, and choice is part of it. So I really think that you have to really think about that, especially in an urban school, because these classrooms are used 24 hours, all day long, all evening long. It's not like you can have one space for one thing and one space for another. It just doesn't work that way.
So I think we have time for one more question, so we can take one from the Slido. Do you have any advice for when you do not have the ability to have contact with students or teachers for a public school project? Like, how do you get the input?
I find this one of the most insane things about our system, where you as an architect are given a program, and often they aren't even sure who is going to be in this school yet, in the sense that they don't know who the administrators are going to be, because it's a few years down the line. So it's all sort of, we know we need a school in this neighborhood, overcrowding, et cetera. But it's a really, really tough, situation to be in, because I think you can bring a lot to the table. But we found that sort of later in the process, we could get access to students or administrators, or people who were going to use the spaces sort of later in the process, once some of these things had been kind of ironed out. But really, when you need it is at the beginning. So anyway. It's a really fraught process that I think more attention should be given to. It's not a great recipe for success.
This is Lauren Melissa, and I just want to add to this that if you don't have direct access to the people who are going to be in the space, I first want to say it's a travesty, but beyond that, it doesn't mean that is a good idea to move forward having consulted no one from the community. And it's 2024, believe it or not. It's already this year, but there is social media, there are websites, there are blogs, there's probably already some website that's like learn from disabled voices in terms of architecture, where you can access and learn these things. You can also consult disabled consultants around this topic. And I want to add to that if you do consult students, families, disability advocates, that you're not expecting them to do the work for free because they would benefit from it, or it's the right thing to do. That's a career as well, or that is work as well. And disabled individuals deserve to be paid for that work.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to leave this. Thank you, Laura and Melissa. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Thanks for being here.